Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, how big can the natural gas industry and other oil production in Pennsylvania and the nation become? Scott Detrow from StateImpact, PA. NPR's guy is here to help us out. Then we're going to talk a little politics with John Baer from the Philadelphia Daily News, and then our popular financial literacy update. I'll get that right. All of that and more following these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, we got a packed 30 minutes here. We're going to get right to it. Scott Detrow, he's NPR's guy. He's StateImpact, PA. If you want to follow what's going on in the natural gas industry, you got to get on StateImpact, PA. Google it, get on it, and follow it. All right, Scott, how big is this industry growing? Every day we read something new about some aspect of drilling, some environmental concern. Take it.
Sure. Energy was a big issue in the presidential campaign, and a report that came out about 2 weeks ago says why. This report says by the end of the decade, if we keep fracking for oil and gas in the United States like we've been doing, we will be producing more oil than Saudi Arabia, more natural gas than Russia. This report says if things continue as they are, the United States will be the top oil and gas producer in the world. And think about how big of a role energy production, where we get it from, has played in the last, century plus. This is a huge deal in terms of energy production, energy use in the country and the world. And that's a good indication that this is going to continue happening in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. It's something that both President Obama and Governor Romney were very bullish on, and it's likely going to continue. So the question is, what sort of safeguards are put in place?
I want to get to those. Let's talk about Pennsylvania in particular. Sort of describe where the drilling is taking place in PA. Go, across this.
Sure.
Go ahead.
If you start south of Pittsburgh in Washington County and kind of make a semicircle, it kind of brushes the south and kind of the northern part of the state. So up in the northeast, Bradford County, Tioga County, kind of making its way across. Doesn't really cut off into Erie, but then down into, the Pittsburgh area and south of Pittsburgh. Now that footprint's going to expand over the next few years, because right now we've been focused on the Marcellus Shale, and there's another deeper shale formation called the Utica Shale, and that has kind of a wider footprint. So this is going to expand where it's happening.
How many jobs is this capable? I mean, I hear 30, 50,000.
Sure.
These numbers get thrown. Any estimate?
It's tough to get a hard number because it depends on how you want to define it. Is the person who's doubling their restaurant intake because drilling's happening in that town, do you want to count them or not? We've been spending the last month focusing on one town in a hot spot, Towanda up in Bradford County. There's no actual drilling in Towanda, but drilling is taking place all around it.
So it's big growth.
Yeah, and I spent days talking to people up there, and by and large, every single person in the town in one way or another says, yes, we have seen a positive economic benefit.
All right, when we come back, there's the environmental concerns Scott Detrow just mentioned. We'll take that up after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation, educating citizens and business leaders about important public policy issues and civic affairs. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by BetterSaferRoads.com. To voice your support for safer highways and less traffic congestion, visit BetterSaferRoads.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back with Scott Detrow. He's NPR's guy, StateImpact, PA, all things natural gas and energy, by the way. All right. Boy, the environmental concerns, we've obviously, and I've done surveys on this, voters are saying do the industry, but boy, they better be safe. What are the 2 or 3 biggest environmental concerns moving forward?
Sure. There's 2 biggest ones, and the first is the hypothetical concern that we haven't really seen played out, where environmentalists are concerned that the chemicals used in this fracking fluid would make its way into water resources. That, again, has not happened to the extent that people are concerned about it. What has happened has been a lot more localized, where the way they go in and drill, due to faulty cementing, due to circumstances beyond their control, gas from under the ground will make its way into water wells, into people's basements, and create gas problems. There was a series of problems in northern Pennsylvania this summer that we covered. So again, it is a problem, but it's much more localized, where a handful of people have water problems. The state has dealt with that in a few different ways, mostly through tightening regulations. At this point, drillers have to use a lot more cement, a lot more steel, put a lot more planning into the drilling than they were when they started this.
Now, one of the concerns that I've heard, Eugene DePasquale, he's been on this program several times, going to be the new Auditor General, has expressed concerns about the cutbacks and the Department of Environmental Protection concerned about water. What about those cutbacks? Is the staff smaller or larger, or what's your sense about that?
They've remained relatively steady over the last few years, but there were some drastic cuts in 2009, 2010 when we were facing major deficits. I think the big concern from a lot of environmental groups, and something that DePasquale talked about on the campaign trail, is kind of a philosophical concern. You look at the Corbett administration, who has pledged that they're going to do everything they can to enforce Pennsylvania's laws, but at the same time you see them out aggressively promoting this industry, saying Pennsylvania's future is tied to this industry. So there's concerns from some Democrats, from environmental groups, saying, how can you be a booster of an industry and be the cop enforcing it? So what DePasquale wants to do is audit DEP's water protection units, their water quality inspections and things like that.
Okay, now before you go, we have about 45 seconds. There's a House member named Jesse White who is in some controversy now about, what's that all about? It's gotten some pretty big news.
He represents a southwestern part of Pennsylvania where there's a lot of drilling. He was initially a big supporter. He's kind of become a fierce critic of drilling. He says due to the portions of Act 13 that kind of stripped local governments of their ability to zone and regulate, he's become a big critic, and Range Resources kind of countered by releasing a lot of emails, probably too blunt, that he sent Range Resources complaining of other things that they hadn't raised enough money for him.
You didn't help me enough.
Yeah.
All right, great update. All right, our popular financial literacy update and my conversation with John Baer, all coming up after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about a book. It's called On the Front Lines of Pennsylvania Politics with John Baer. He's a columnist for the Philadelphia Daily News. He's syndicated. I read his column somehow in the Los Angeles Times or wherever it gets syndicated. Here's the book. I'm going to put it right up there. It's called On the Front Line of Pennsylvania Politics, and there it is. I'll get it straight for you. John Baer, welcome.
Terry, thanks so much.
All right, now what's in it? We want them to buy it. Barnes & Noble, that's where I got this, right?
Barnes & Noble, Amazon.
Oh, cool. All right.
Any place.
Describe it.
Makes great holiday gifts.
There you go. Describe it.
It's really an irreverent, if you can believe it, look at Pennsylvania politics as I've covered it 25 years for the Daily News and even longer if you go back to my starting days as a Patriot. And it's largely chronological. It does a couple things. It kind of sets out a history of state politics moving from Shapp right through Thornburg and on through Corbett. And a friend of mine pointed out something I hadn't really noticed, said that she noted that the lines most often recurrent in telling these stories about the issues and the people in Pennsylvania politics were two. One was, I'm not making this up, and the other was, he also went to prison.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, of course, if we go back to Shapp, there have been a number of... So give me one or two of the sort of interesting stories that will titillate the viewers out there to get them to
Well, I think there's a lot of stories in there that people probably have forgotten. For instance, you remember how the whole political world was delighted in 2010 when the Delaware Senate candidate, Christine O'Donnell, had to publicly say, I am not a witch.
Right.
Pennsylvania had that first.
We did?
Way back in the 90s, we had a state rep from Erie, Tom Ridge's hometown, who had to publicly say, I am not a witch. And she also had to deal with the fact that the feds were on her for obtaining some federal surplus, like a 50-ton generator. And
did I miss that?
I'm telling you, you were around. It's just one of those things that slipped through the cracks. Yeah. Tracy Seifert, she ended up going to prison.
I remember, that's right, I do remember that.
Go ahead. But the thing I loved about the story was, when I wrote about it, I said, look, a lot of people, particularly editors at my newspaper, think I make things up about the Pennsylvania legislature. But there was a representative who had to publicly say, I'm not a witch.
I'm not a witch.
And the Erie radio stations were playing Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead while they were going after her. So, but there's tons of stories and a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff from the great campaigns that we've had. You know, you and I grew up on great campaigns in this state. We were spoiled in the 90s.
Yes, we were.
When you look at the Year of the Woman, when Arlen Specter ran against Lynn Yankel.
Almost lost, was behind in the poll that I did for your paper.
The primary, Arlen Specter's primary against Pat Toomey, which on the night, I talk about in here, I sat in the Philadelphia Daily News newsroom on deadline, watching the clock, and literally wrote 3 different leads. Arlen upset, Arlen hangs on, too close to call. Yeah. And if you remember, he won by just a minuscule
25,000 votes or something like that, yeah. And you also have some stuff on Governor Casey. I know you, Senator Casey's father, I know you covered him in great detail. The pro-life thing, how all that evolved, how he thought he was going to run for the presidency at one point.
Yeah. There again, we were spoiled. We had a governor in office who bucked his own party, came out publicly against its nominee, Bill Clinton, all on the choice issue. Went to the Democratic Convention in New York in '92, you remember this?
Yes.
And demanded to speak. They wouldn't let him speak. He said his party had left him, and then he was going to run for president on the same issue. Went to Chicago the next convention, held press conferences about it. Got a lot of national attention. It was a lot of fun to cover, and I mean, we really have enjoyed sort of the heydays of Pennsylvania politics.
You're not suggesting that they're over. Come on now. Well, you've had a lot of fun with the current administration and the current legislature.
Yeah, but it's just not the same. I mean, you look at the personalities that we've had the pleasure to cover.
You mean Ed Rendell?
Ed Rendell. There's
Arlen?
Great Ed Rendell stories in here. Arlen, Vince Fumo, Bill DeWeese. I mean,
some of these people are currently wearing orange, if that's what color you wear when you go to prison.
Went to prison, right?
Go ahead.
And now, when you look at the big landscape, we have Tom Corbett, Pat Toomey, Bob Casey. Not exactly scintillating personalities. I mean, maybe that's good for the state. It's bad for people like me.
That's right. It's bad journalism when they're not dramatic and. Well, as you know, some of them would do walking press conferences. They would talk to you.
Oh, totally accessible all the time. No more. That's one of the things that has really changed, you know. In the past, when you were with a candidate, you were with the candidate. I mean, you got to know them, you got to talk with them, you had a meal with them, you had a drink with them. Now everything is so scripted, everything's so controlled, access is limited.
Right.
I mean, these guys, the guys that we covered for so long, totally different than the politicians we have today, and I think that's a shame.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, look, I want to thank you for coming in. Hold on, don't go anywhere. I'm going to hold this up one more time. Pennsylvania Politics. It's a wonderful book. A lot of it's from John's columns, which I've read through the years. I'll tell you, it's a must read. Barnes & Noble, Amazon, wherever. The shameless promotion is now over, and we're going to go to our popular financial literacy update. Back in a moment. Stay here.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, this is a segment you're not going to want to miss. We're going to talk about helping people in time of disasters. Our friends from the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association are here. Mike Wishnow, he's a senior VP, he's a regular guest. Ken Hartzler, he's with Everence Federal Credit Union. They're both here to talk about this. First of all, we've had Hurricane Sandy, then we've had, we forgot Tropical Storm Lee. In 2011, a lot of damage along the Susquehanna River Basin. I'm going to start with you, Kent. Credit unions, there to help. That's part of your mantra. Talk about some of the ways that credit unions are available in times of distress for people.
Thanks, Terry. Well, in general, credit unions, excuse me, are all about serving members and their community, and so in times like this, when people's lives are disrupted, even more so. A couple examples that come to mind is credit unions are part of a shared branching network, or can be, and if one credit union is experiencing a disruption, they can go into another credit union branch and be provided services.
Yeah, but you have a whole bunch of, let's talk about those services. I noticed here you have waive ATM fees, increasing the cash withdrawal limit. Of course, if you have electricity, I guess, to get to an ATM, right? Waive overdraft fees. Talk about some of those specifically that you think are helpful to people.
Well, sure. In times of crisis, credit unions are well positioned to help their members get through the crisis. And that crisis is typically phased. There's an immediate crisis, and then there's a long-term crisis.
Right, good
These
point.
folks are going to be in the soup for quite some time. And I know many credit unions, and Ken, I'm sure at your credit union, you take a number of measures to help for everything from loans to deposits, right?
Specific examples, I mean, credit unions know their members, and so they can relax a policy or procedure that might be in place for a good reason, but in an extraordinary time, you know, waiving overdraft fees or ATM limits, or maybe extending a loan payment or modifying a term of something can be extremely helpful for people in these situations.
Sure, maybe skip payments
Sure.
if something occurs that, how often have you had to do this over in your credit union, for example?
Well, more and more often, and now as you talked about the two events that happened, and as we approach the winter season, I think these kind of disruptions are happening more frequently, and it doesn't take much, maybe electricity or communication or transportation being impeded a bit for it to cause a crisis for people. So we're finding that we're doing more and more of these types of things.
Now you all have a foundation that also provides assistance. How does that work, and what kind of assistance do you provide?
We do. We have a foundation which is Pennsylvania's credit union's philanthropic arm, and it's a not-for-profit foundation. One of its missions is disaster recovery. In the most recent Hurricane Sandy, we helped to collect money from credit unions to send it to the impacted area.
Right.
Last year, when Lee came through and really wiped out a bunch of homes up and down the Susquehanna River Basin. Yeah, we gave out almost $200,000 in small grants, $500, $1,000 in nature, and those grants were given out within 3 weeks.
Right.
So
you got the money
helped
to the
immediate
people who helped
need,
it, right?
Right, before people were getting some insurance money just to get them through.
All right, now this is something you really going to want to pay attention to. Now, I don't know, my wife has probably done this, but you've got to get a plan. You got to get prepared. So let's go through.
Sure.
Make some notes on this. We want you to be safe out there. Go ahead.
You know, I think a lot of people don't plan because they fear it's too complicated or too complex.
Or it won't happen to them.
Or it won't happen to them, much like a financial budget. But there's just simple, basic steps that people can do to be prepared. We make some resources available at our credit union as well, but it's just basically thinking through scenarios. What would I do if a certain thing would happen? How would I be prepared?
Yeah. So you need, so specifically, you would say you've got to go you got to have medical supplies, you got to have water, you got to have clothing in a certain place so that if you need it. I mean, these are really concrete steps that we don't think about. Absolutely. I noticed that everybody was running around trying to get a generator at the last minute. Well, you can't think about doing that when the lines are 3 blocks long, right, Mike? To buy a generator.
Absolutely. There's sort of, I mean, preparedness is very important. You know, Winston Churchill said, he who fails to plan, plans to fail.
Right.
And basically, what Kent was saying and what his credit union does, and many credit unions do, and even for the general public, you can go to FEMA's website. It's a little booklet, and it has fill in the blank. And you fill in all your personal information on your kids, your financial information, where your insurance policies are, what they cover, all of those kinds of things. So, you know, to have that information in one place, the plan itself is one thing. And the other thing you talked about, Terry, was the kit. Putting together a bunch of supplies that's going to get you through the first 2-3 days of a disaster.
Absolutely.
Building on that, I mean, my sense is that a lot of people just simply don't do that. I mean, I noticed that when Sandy, we weren't sure about it. I mean, all of us, I think, sort of thought you get to run on water. But I think that somehow we need, and there's been a lot of news about preparing. I mean, just about every TV station in in the East Coast was talking with people about this. But in addition to getting them, you have to keep them. So, okay, now it's over.
Right.
Right? So we'll forget about it, right?
Yeah, and the key is to be prepared ahead of time. When life gets complicated and these events, you're in the midst of them, the last thing you want to be doing is trying to figure out where your important documents are or what your response is going to be.
Yeah, well, moving forward on something else that as we get into the holiday season here, about being careful about your credit cards. Before I let you get away, I want to ask you, because this is one of your big kicks. We've talked about this, about making sure you're careful with the credit cards, about identity. Give us some help as we move into these holiday seasons.
Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, Thanksgiving, we give thanks that we weren't part of the disaster, and those that were really ought to try and help. As far as entering into the holiday season and shopping, you got to safeguard your financial information. Kent, in your credit union, you tell your members.
A lot of it's common sense. Be vigilant with your personal financial information, particularly online. You know, a lot of people are doing online shopping. Know the retailers that you're dealing with. Be prudent with your information, and just use basic common sense.
Yeah. Now, does that hold true? Now, the other point is about running up these credit cards and watching the interest rates. Again, that's something that we've talked about. You know, we want people to consume, but we want them to be wise consumers and not to end up with huge credit card debts. I mean, I know you guys are in the business of making money, but you also want to make sure that your customers, you know, can pay the bills and are spending prudently, right?
Well, yeah, and the rule of thumb is if you're going to be paying it off for more than 6 months, you've probably overspent.
Is that right? I've never heard you say that before.
Yeah.
Say that again.
If it's going to take you more than 6 months to pay for your Christmas, you've probably overspent.
Let me plug a Christmas Club account, a very basic way of savings. If people have payroll deduction, direct deposit, divide it by 26 payrolls, and start planning ahead of time for a Christmas or vacation account.
Put a little money away and then just spend that money, and don't have to worry about going into debt with credit cards and then get that January blues when the first one comes along. Is that right?
Oh, you'll feel a lot better in January, no doubt.
Well, maybe when you come back in December, and I think what we ought to do, if you can do it, is sort of talk about these overall concerns about, as we get into the holidays, Mike, what we need to be aware of to bring us, you know, to do this consumer update. All right, I want to thank you guys for coming on. As always, this is a great update and lots of good advice for the folks. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.